Here's an idea. The streamable television series is our opera, our 3-part novel, our epic poem. Looking back, a number of historians have celebrated a 3-part relationship between a creative form, a period of time, and a location. England, 16th century, theater. Vienna, 18th century, chamber music. Russia, 19th century, novels. Crime and Punishment, Mozart's Violin sonatas, and Macbeth survive today as monoliths, big important works associated with pomp and circumstance now, but in their own time not necessarily highfalutin. And the same goes for their forms, big honkin' novel, people with violins, live drama. While examples of these forms have survived as masterpieces, and the forms themselves are often considered sophisticated today, in their own time, they were simply popular.
How could it be popular?
This makes me curious about us. What type of popular work might survive as the archetypal form of the early 21st century? What'll later generations look back on and say of us, that was it, that was their preeminent cultural form, their model media? Not specific works like Harry Potter, Star Wars, or Dark Souls, but types of work like the novel, the film, or the video game. In this episode, I want to make the case that our model media might be a kind of TV series. And I'll explain what I mean, but first, let's look at a historical example. England, 18th century, the 3-part novel. In the late 18th century in England, the combination of an emerging reading class and their newfangled printing technology made novels easier and cheaper to print. Publishers capitalized by creating the 3-volume novel. The story set up in volume 1 would capture the attention of an eager public and then require them to return for later volumes to finish. Entire volumes were expensive to purchase, so they were largely lent, not bought. Income on volume 1 would pay for 2, and so on and so forth. Single volumes were often broken up into even smaller chunks and released as parts after a delay. Many of those smaller and significantly less expensive chunks came to be called penny dreadfuls. Those melodramatic stories were treated in their own time as rap music and video games have been treated recently, with moral outrage. But some of those small chunks were also how works by Charles Dickens and George Eliot first got into the hands of a wide audience in the mid-19th century. And these are writers we now celebrate as some of the best lit there is, not just good, but important. This scenario plays out again and again. Available technology mutually reinforces the desires of a public and leads to a mountain of popular work in a particular format. Some of those works possess a longevity and end up working like a bridge, connecting a moment in time with an iconic format. It's arguably happened several times over throughout the world and history with the novel, and in the West with film throughout the 20th century. Television in the US has even had 3 so-called golden ages, once in the 40s, again in the 80s, and again right now. Those TV golden ages correspond with the birth of the industry, the popularization of cable TV, and today, the internet. But for TV to be golden doesn't necessarily mean it's preeminent. In the US, in the 20th century, there's a strong case to be made that our model media has been film. The significant, popular, and enduring stories of late have largely been told on the big screen. However, with the 3rd golden age of television, economically and creatively, the winds, they feel like they are a-changin'. Critics and audiences are increasingly talking about TV like it's poised to become our model media, as I've called it. I'd narrow that claim down though, and I would say that it's not simply the TV series, but the slightly different streaming series. Some examples probably come right to mind, like Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Terrace House, which we're working on an episode about, Transparent, and these are all on the right track. But bear with me because there are many more series that stream than just Netflix and Amazon originals. And they're not all what I mean when I say streaming series. Like, a TV series which can be streamed online is not automatically a streaming series, I don't think. Putting NCIS on Hulu doesn't make it a streaming series. But neither is every TV show incapable of streaming. Humans, Sherlock, Game of Thrones, and even Breaking Bad feel just as, if not more, at home streamed rather than simply watched. It is a weird distinction, but not one that's immaterial, I don't think. The streamed show is screen agnostic. It feels comfortable on all types of devices, and often its cultural impact intersects with its portability such that you feel you have to find time to watch it, like on the bus, and so good news that you can. Also, a streamed series doesn't always have ads, and when it does, pacing works both with and without them. The streamed show is available on demand, and is, perhaps above all and almost in summary, easy to watch. Even if they aren't released all at once, a huge subset of streamable series are designed to be binged. These shows spawn tweet-alongs, hot thinky take pieces, and become cultural events. The day after release, all your friends have magically found 15 extra hours to watch the whole thing. Shows more like Humans, House of Cards, The Night Of, or Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life, and less like Gilmore Girls proper, Doctor Who, or Friends. There is some gray area though, like 30 Rock and maybe even The Good Wife. The upshot being, the medium doesn't just change the way we consume, but also changes how stories get told. Hey, we did an episode about that. Also, this other guy, Aristotle, maybe you've heard of him, he also talked about that, in a way that aligns pretty well with what we're talking about right now, too. Aristotle said that there were two preeminent cultural forms of his time and place: epic poetry and tragic poetry. In the epic, which is divided into sections, parts, or episodes, the grand overarching story provides a narrative and thematic framework for the individual bits, allowing smaller stories to come together as a whole. A good way for decomposing a big story into chunks, which are easier to memorize and conveniently to follow, while still being able to tell these crazy big stories. Sound familiar?
Next Sunday night at 9, only on AMC.
Dickens was no different. His novels are often so descriptive and lengthy because of that serial form. As a serialized author, he was paid by the installment for every 32 pages, just enough to advance some story and then leave people hanging. And today, with the streamed series, often there's pressure to get going quick, to grab people, but then build complexity as you go. Every episode needs to accomplish something, make a reveal, or have a cliffhanger that makes me turn to Molly at 1:30 a.m. after having already watched 4 episodes to go, okay, just like one more, right? Just like one more, I promise it's the last one.
Wait.
What?
That's the last one.
We can flip the causality around, too, and say, now that television creators can assume that their works will be stored in a globally accessible database, infinitely rewatchable, potentially freed from commercial breaks, and consumed by individuals according to their own schedules, or lack thereof, that they feel more empowered to tell more complicated, literally epic stories. A whole that is more than the sum of its parts. And perhaps our model media isn't simply the streamable series, but the epic streamable series. True. TV has been around for a while, and as we've just demonstrated, the epic series has been around for almost literal ever. I may argue that the streaming series is new enough itself, but fair point. Maybe our model media should be cutting edge. Social media, visual albums, podcasts, YouTube shows, VR, whatever Mouth Moods is, besides a work of pure genius. And yes, these forms exhibit the technological and cultural fervor of our moment, but arguably, they don't have the reach or appeal of a leading cultural form, a model media. The streamable series is everywhere, socially, economically, and, well, that's kind of it, but social and economic sort of covers, like, most things. The most compelling indication that the epic streaming TV series may be ascendant over box office film may be that the epic ethos of the successful streamable series is worming its way back into cinema. Standalone films have become increasingly rare as franchises like the Marvel Universe films, Harry Potter, The Virgins, Star Wars, and so on become cultural events. Just like in the 1700s, where a new reading class emerged and new forms were driven by technological advances and demands of that audience, now being able to watch all of season 1 of The 100 in a single weekend or consume Stranger Things as one 13-hour marathon might just be changing our culture's taste in movies and other media as well. So hopefully I've made my case, but at this point you may be asking, what do we get out of identifying our model media ahead of the perspective provided by history? On the one hand, it's another justification for taking things like Westworld as seriously as we tend to here on Idea Channel, but it's also that our most successful entertainment will likely become a record of our culture. Our notions of what life might have been like in 16th century England or 19th century Russia are heavily influenced by the works of Shakespeare and Dostoevsky. That might be the real riddle posed by our present. Not what media will leave for later generations, but what they will end up assuming was true about our lives and values based upon the media that we appeared to value. So when we look across the array of popular media, where do we see the widest and most earnest expression of our time? Do we see a wide and earnest expression of our time? In cinema? In TV? In the epic streamable series? Don't get me wrong, I wish that it were the YouTube show, but when I meet people at parties and they ask me what I do and I tell them, mostly they say, oh, that must be fun. So we still got a little way to go. What do y'all think? What is our model media? And I'm fully willing to admit that that our could mean many different things. Is it the streamable series, the epic streamable series, the film, or something else? Let us know in the comments, and I'll respond to some of them in next week's comment response video. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding the end of history and the end of the world. If you want to watch that one, you can wait for the end card to show up or find a link in the doobly-doo. Hey, it's good to be back. For anybody who didn't follow along, I spent about a week and a half in Japan for vacation. I posted a lot of photos on Instagram. You can see exactly how many vending machine coffees I purchased. Spoiler alert, it's a lot. But yeah, it's good to get back into the swing of things. In case you missed it, we recently posted some Idea Channel wallpapers over at the Patreon. Those are public posts, so you can see them whether or not you give. If you do want to support the show, we would always love your support. Thanks to everybody who currently helps us out. PBS Digital Studios is doing another audience survey for people who filled it out before. You know what you're getting yourself into, but we would love to hear from you again. If you want to check that out, we would love to hear about the kinds of things that you're interested in, who you are, etc., etc. We'll put a link to that in the doobly-doo as well. Also, I know we mentioned it briefly in this week's episode, but next week's episode is about Terrace House. So if you haven't watched it, it's on Netflix. It's great. You should watch it. Even give it like 2 episodes. You sort of will get the gist. But you're not gonna watch. It's like potato chips. You can't have just a couple. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, and the tweet of the week comes from Ellie Green, who points us towards a post about Alien, which is one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, and the confusion surrounding the word xenomorph. I mean, I'm gonna say what I say whenever I endorse a thing to read, which is that you should just read it. And it's true, but perhaps more true. I've now burned this convincing argument on something about Alien, but I feel like it's worth it. You should just read it. And last but certainly not least, this week's episode would not have been possible or good without the very hard work of these Georges Eliot.